In the middle of the air, 30,000 feet above a city burning to the ground, a woman stood up, pistol in hand, whispering her Arabic prayers, and made the most insane decision anyone could imagine. What a heroic Marine did in that moment still shocks Americans to this day. August 2021, Kabul, Afghanistan. A city of 5 million people is holding its breath. For 20 years, the United States military had been present in this ancient, fractured land, fighting, building, bleeding, and hoping. The mission had evolved from a targeted strike against terrorism into something vast and complex, a 2-decade effort to reshape a nation from the ground up. Roads were built, schools opened, women attended university. A generation of Afghans had grown up under the fragile canopy of something that looked almost like peace. Then, in the summer of 2021, the Taliban came back, faster than anyone predicted, faster than any intelligence assessment had warned. Province by province, city by city, the Afghan government collapsed like a house of cards in a strong wind. On August 15, 2021, Kabul itself fell. What followed was one of the most dramatic, chaotic, and ultimately remarkable military operations in American history. Not a battle of bullets and bombs, but of aircraft, logistics, courage, and compassion. Over 120,000 people were evacuated from Kabul in a matter of weeks, and the men and women who made that happen deserve to be known. This is their story. Before we go any further, if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next aboard these flights is something no training manual could ever prepare you for. Our goal is to reach 5,000 subscribers before the end of March, and every single one of you gets a shout-out from us once we hit that milestone. Drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching this from today? Subscribe, share, don't miss what comes next. Let's begin our story. To understand what happened in August 2021, you have to go back, all the way back to a clear Tuesday morning in September 2001. On September 11, 2001, the extremist group Al-Qaeda, operating from sanctuaries deep inside Taliban-controlled Afghanistan, hijacked 4 commercial airplanes and turned them into weapons. Nearly 3,000 people died. The World Trade Center fell. The Pentagon burned. A field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, became a graveyard for heroes who refused to let a 4th plane reach its target. America went to war. Operation Enduring Freedom launched on October 7, 2001. The objective was clear: remove the Taliban from power, dismantle Al-Qaeda, and prevent Afghanistan from ever again being used as a launching pad for mass murder. What no one could have fully anticipated was how long that would take, or how complicated it would become. Over 2 decades, the mission expanded far beyond its original scope. American and coalition forces trained Afghan soldiers. They built schools and courthouses. They supported elections, promoted governance, and tried, at enormous cost in blood and treasure, to give the Afghan people the tools they needed to build a stable, democratic future. More than 2,400 American service members died in Afghanistan. Over 20,000 were wounded. The financial cost exceeded $2 trillion. And through it all, the Taliban, patient, relentless, ideologically committed, waited. In February 2020,
President Donald Trump's administration signed the Doha Agreement, a deal with the Taliban that set the conditions for a U.S. withdrawal. President Joe Biden's administration subsequently confirmed and completed the withdrawal, setting a final deadline of August 31, 2021. The Taliban didn't wait for the deadline. Why would they? By August 15, 2021, they were already in Kabul. With the fall of Kabul, one location became the single most important piece of real estate in Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai International Airport. It was the only way out. Thousands of people converged on that airport, Afghan civilians who had worked alongside American forces, translators who had risked their lives to help American soldiers communicate, aid workers, doctors, teachers, parents clutching children, people who had been promised that America would not leave them behind. Young United States Marines manned the gates, checking passports, scanning faces, holding the line between order and chaos around the clock in desert heat under a threat level that was as high as anything they had ever trained for. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and exposed, and they held. The operation designed to manage this crisis was called Operation Allies Refuge. It involved the Department of State, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security working in urgent, overlapping coordination to identify eligible evacuees, process documentation, conduct security screenings, and arrange transportation. Countries around the world, the United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, and dozens more, opened their doors and contributed aircraft and processing facilities. At the heart of this operation was the C-17 Globemaster III, the workhorse of American military aviation. A massive four-engine strategic transport aircraft, the C-17 can carry over 170,000 pounds of cargo. Its cavernous interior can be reconfigured in hours, from hauling tanks to carrying patients on stretchers. During the Kabul evacuation, it carried something rarer than cargo and more precious than equipment: human beings, packed shoulder to shoulder on the cargo floor, sometimes 450 or more per flight. No seats, no air conditioning, one small toilet. In those cramped, sweltering conditions, history was being made.
August 22, 2021. The air at Kabul International Airport is a wall of heat. The crew of Reach 651, a C-17 on evacuation duty, has done everything right. Before a single Afghan civilian stepped onto their aircraft, each passenger was searched, every bag examined. The briefing had been unambiguous. Suicide bombers had been reported in the crowds. The threat was real. The consequences of a single failure were unthinkable. Now, Reach 651 is in the air. The cargo hold is packed with 450 people. Men, women, children, elderly. Dozens of them are parentless children, unaccompanied minors who found their way to the airport through means no one will ever fully know. They sit on the hard floor of the cargo bay, shoulder to shoulder, row after row, many of them having never been on an airplane before. For many, this is both the most terrifying and most hopeful moment of their lives. The lone interpreter aboard is a woman. In the cultural context of the passenger she's serving, her authority is being openly challenged. The language barrier is severe, the cultural barrier is worse, and this is only the beginning. Major Drew Dela Cruz, a 2012 graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, sits in the cockpit.
an experienced pilot with a background flying KC-135 air tankers, he is, by every account, a cool customer. The kind of officer who processes crises the way other people process weather reports, calmly, methodically, without visible alarm. He is going to need every ounce of that composure today, because Reach 651 is running out of fuel. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the destination, is experiencing what you might call a traffic jam at the end of the world. Dozens of C-17s, all loaded with Afghan evacuees, are circling in the airspace, waiting to land. The tarmac is overwhelmed. Air traffic control is doing what it can, but there is simply not enough runway for the aircraft pouring in from Kabul. Reach 651 joins the queue and waits, and the fuel gauges drop. Then the second crisis begins. In the packed cargo hold, a 16-year-old girl, a young mother, begins to convulse. Her body seizes, she loses consciousness, and in a space so tightly packed with human beings that there is no room to lay her flat, no room to reach her, no room to do anything remotely resembling proper medical care, Senior Airman Kimberly Heiser acts. Heiser is the only female crew member on Reach 651. That fact, in the context of the cultural dynamics of the passengers, is significant. As she would later say, "I think it would have gone a lot differently if one of the men were forced to administer aid." She climbs, literally climbs over refugees to reach the young woman. She assesses her condition: heat stress, severe, potentially life-threatening. Major Dela Cruz makes a call that breaks protocol. He authorizes Heiser to bring the unconscious young woman up to the cockpit area. As the airmen carry the girl through the cargo hold, something shifts in the crowd. Two Afghan men, agitated, frightened, perhaps reading the situation as something sinister through the lens of a culture shaped by decades of war and occupation, decide to act. They force their way toward the front of the cargo compartment. They are trying to reach the flight deck. Stop. Think about what this means. On an aircraft filled with 450 people, over a war zone, with unresolved fuel issues and a medical emergency in progress, two men are attempting to breach the cockpit. A loadmaster intercepts one. A Phoenix Raven, a highly trained Air Force security specialist, stops the other using non-lethal force. Inside the cockpit, First Lieutenant Corvin has barricaded the door. A crew member stands ready with a service pistol. Heiser later reflected on that moment. The decision not to use lethal force to protect the cockpit demonstrated an extraordinary restraint by the aircrew, as they were briefed to use all means necessary to prevent Afghans from gaining entry to the flight deck. That restraint, in a moment where lethal force was authorized and arguably justified, protected not only the two Afghan men who had charged the cockpit, it protected every life on that aircraft. Dela Cruz, navigating all of this simultaneously, the fuel emergency, the medical crisis, the security threat, declares a medical emergency and brings Reach 651 down. Air traffic control gives several unsafe taxiing instructions before the crew finds a safe path. Medics board. The young woman is removed for treatment. Heiser never learned what happened to her. That uncertainty, that unanswered question, is perhaps the most human part of this entire story. You do everything right, you give everything you have, and sometimes you simply never know.
Stop for a second. A young airwoman, alone, climbed over 450 terrified refugees to save a stranger's life. A pilot held it together while his aircraft ran low on fuel, a cockpit was nearly breached, and a teenager lay unconscious in his arm's reach. Could you have done what they did? Drop your answer in the comments below, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.
These people deserve to be remembered. August 25, 2021. Abbey Gate, 5:53 p.m. local time. A suicide bomber walks into the crowd gathered at the gate, the very crowd of desperate people hoping to be processed, documented, and saved, and detonates an explosive belt. The explosion kills 182 people, among them 169 Afghan civilians and 13 United States service members, 11 Marines, 1 Navy corpsman, 1 Army soldier. They were 20 years old, 22, 23. They had names: Darren Hoover, Yohani Rosario Pichardo, Nicole G., Hunter Lopez, Dagan Page, Humberto Sanchez, David Espinosa, Jared Schmitz, Riley McCullum, Dylan Marola, Kareem Nakui, Maxton Soviak, Ryan Knaus. They were kids from Salt Lake City and Lawrence and Sacramento and Rio Bravo. They had families waiting for them. They were doing their jobs, holding a gate, keeping order, protecting the very evacuation that was trying to save others. The attack was claimed by Islamic State Khorasan, ISIS's Afghan affiliate. All gates were immediately closed. The airport went into lockdown. And then, into that silence, into that smoke and grief and fury, the crew of Moose 98 flew in. Moose 98 was carrying a critical care air transport team, a CCAT, when it became the first aircraft to land at Kabul's airport after the bombing. Their mission? Evacuate the most severely wounded personnel as quickly as possible. What they found was a scene that defied preparation. Although I was told what to expect, it was very shocking to see very young Marines, sailors, and soldiers walk on the plane with traumatic injuries, said Major Caitlin Donahoe, a flight nurse with the crew. But my crew responded fast and effectively. The bravery and selflessness they all displayed are indescribable. The wounded kept coming. There was no warning, no manifest, no orderly queue. Patients arrived at the aircraft in waves, some walking, some carried, some barely clinging to consciousness. The CCAT improvised. They triaged. They worked. By the time Moose 98's mission was complete, they had conducted the largest aeromedical evacuation from the coalition hospital in the entire operation. 22 patients in less than 15 hours, 6 critical, 16 non-critical. Every single one of them arrived alive at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Every single one. In the crew of Moose 98 was a woman named Major Katie Lunning. On paper, she was an Air National Guard nurse deployed for a 6-month tour at a medical unit in Qatar. She had started her journey into healthcare as a combat medic with the Minnesota Army National Guard, straight out of high school. She found her calling and pursued nursing. She joined the Minnesota VA as a student nurse. She graduated from Bethel University in St. Paul with her Bachelor of Science in Nursing. She worked in the ICU. She joined the 133rd Airlift Wing. She was, by her own description, just doing her job. Before the bombing, her regular medical evacuation missions into Kabul had their own kind of quiet courage. She would push a stretcher from the runway to the airport gate, down 3 blocks, through streets packed with thousands of desperate, pressing people, to reach a tiny international hospital. Her only weapon was a Beretta M9 pistol. She never felt she would need to draw it. The typical mission was 3.5 hours from Kabul to Qatar. A few critical patients, a small team, 2 doctors, 2 respiratory specialists, 2 nurses. The kind of mission that would read on paper as manageable. August 26th was not a paper mission. We were pulling them out as they are getting injured, Lunning recalled. August 26th, when the suicide bomber exploded at Abbey Gate, we were the first team in. It was the largest medical evacuation out of that coalition hospital ever, and very dangerous on the ground. We had to leave the airplane to go get our patients as well. We took injured Marines and Afghan civilians who really weren't flight-worthy, but there was no choice. We just had to get them out of there. Inside the aircraft, as Moose 98 flew toward Germany, medical events continued. Patients deteriorated and stabilized. The team worked without pause. And through it all, Lunning held on to something, a mantra the crew had built together. We can't control what's happening on the ground. What we can control is our jobs. She thought about her kids. She thought about the Marines on her stretchers, some of them barely older than teenagers, who had their own reasons for being there. She thought about getting everyone home to their people. We just focused on getting everybody home to their people because everybody's going to have a why, she said. We talked about that and how it was our role to get them back to their reason for being there. Every patient survived.
Over 120,000 people were evacuated from Kabul in August 2021. That number is almost too large to hold in your mind. 120,000 individual lives, 120,000 stories of fear and hope and loss and rescue. The evacuation was imperfect. Not everyone who wanted to leave was able to go. The security situation was lethal. The logistics were strained beyond anything the system was designed to handle. 13 Americans died. Hundreds of Afghans died. The bombing at Abbey Gate was a tragedy that cannot and should not be minimized. And yet, within that chaos, within the heat and the fuel emergencies and the overcrowded cargo floors and the medical crises and the bodies in the streets, ordinary American men and women did something that deserves to be called extraordinary. A pilot held his aircraft together under simultaneous pressure that would have broken lesser command. A young airwoman climbed over 450 refugees to save a stranger's life and exercised restraint that protected hundreds more. A nurse carried a mantra into the worst day of her career and delivered every patient alive. They did not do these things for awards. They did them because that is who they are, and that is what they were trained to do, and because, in the most fundamental sense, it was the right thing to do. What this story teaches us is not about war. It's about something older and more durable than any conflict. It's about the fact that when the worst happens, there will always be people who run toward it. People who stay calm when calm seems impossible. People who hold the line, carry the stretcher, fly the aircraft, and bring the broken home. That is the American spirit at its most essential, and it deserves to be remembered. If this story reminded you that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things, share it, right now, with someone who needs to hear it. These veterans, these nurses, these aircrew deserve to be remembered. Subscribe for a new story every week. Never let their courage be forgotten. Hit subscribe, drop a comment, share this story, and watch out for our next story coming very soon. Thank you for staying until the end. It means everything. The Distinguished Flying Cross is America's fourth highest award for valor in aerial flight. It was established on July 2, 1926, and its list of recipients reads like a hall of fame: astronauts, generals, admirals, and icons. It is awarded for singular acts of heroism or extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. For only the second time in history, a registered nurse received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Major Katie Lunning became the first Air National Guard nurse ever to receive the award. The first nurse to receive it, Lieutenant Alida E. Lutz, had flown 196 missions and evacuated over 3,500 wounded men during World War II. She died in a crash over Italy in November 1944 and received the medal posthumously. Her name now graces a Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Saginaw, Michigan. 80 years separated those two women. 2 wars, 2 eras of flight, 1 unbroken line of extraordinary service. Lunning was selected as the Military Times 2023 Airman of the Year. She returned to the Central Iowa VA as an ICU nurse manager, and the community that surrounded her, combat medics, RNs, ICU nurses, VA employees, Air National Guard members, and their families, celebrated what she had proved, that ordinary people in extraordinary moments are capable of things that leave the rest of us breathless. The full crew of Reach 651, Major Alexander Archidiacono, Major Drew Dela Cruz, First Lieutenant Ryan Corvin, Staff Sergeant Brandon Jensen, Staff Sergeant Equante Mason, Senior Airman Kimberly Heiser, Senior Airman Matthew Williams, and Airman First Class Jeremy Ada received the Distinguished Flying Cross for their actions on August 22, 2021. The crew of Moose 98, 19 men and women, received the Distinguished Flying Cross for their actions on August 26, 2021. 19 names, 19 human beings who flew into the worst day of the evacuation and brought the wounded home. And the 13 who gave everything at Abbey Gate received the Congressional Gold Medal, Congress's highest expression of national appreciation. They were honored in November 2021. The legislation was introduced hours after the last American military boots left Afghan soil. The American service members went above and beyond the call of duty, the bill reads. They exemplified extreme bravery and valor, and their heroism deserves great honor.